A busy day here at Halas Hall in Lake Forest. So there was a little bit of cleanup to do, obviously, from Friday and Thursday as well, with how everybody saw how that game ended in Detroit, and really what I think the conclusion has been over the last few days is what happened in the locker room after that game is really what left Kevin Warren, the team president, and Ryan Poles, the general manager, with absolutely no choice but to move on from Matt Eberflus, because it was clear in that moment that he had lost the locker room and a change was needed. So here we are Monday, a few days later. The things that I think we've learned is, one, there's some just logistical things like, okay, Thomas Brown has done a pretty good job here with Caleb since he took over as offensive coordinator for Shane Waldron. How can he now handle that job, which is probably the most important job left over these last 5 games? How can you continue to develop and get the most out of Caleb Williams when you're not going to the playoffs with also now all these other added responsibilities? And I have to say, Thomas Brown, I've been actually saying this for a few weeks now, even before he became head coach, just in terms of coaches that I've dealt with here over the last 14 years inside this building. I don't think there's a coach that's given me a better first impression in terms of how he leads, how decisive he is, no nonsense, just right to the point. And from what I've gathered from these players, they feel the exact same way. And so, really his message to the team this morning in his first team meeting was just, cleaning the things up that need to be cleaned, keeping things in-house, bringing unity, he used that word, unifying this team, and then cleaning up all the pre-snap penalties, kind of all the messy stuff that's been going on, which, Todd, I'm sure you could speak to this. Like when teams start to lose trust in the coaching staff, you get sloppier on the field because everybody's just not quite dialed into the same level that they were before. And so I'm really interested to see, especially in this matchup this week against the 49ers, who are obviously dealing with their own struggles right now, how the Bears come out of that tunnel, how they perform, and how quickly some of that stuff gets cleaned up. Because if you just look at the offense over the last few weeks since Thomas Brown took over, it's been night and day. And so if that has the same effect across the whole roster, it would not surprise me at all if this team that's still pretty talented has a nice finish here in these last 5 weeks.
Yeah, I definitely feel like when you lose faith in the head coach, you're like playing for yourself. You're only worried about how things affect you. Like, we're not a unit anymore because we feel like the head guy is not steering the ship in the right way. My question to you would be, when most teams fire their head coach, you usually get a bump that next week where you win the game and you feel like everything is on the right track. Do you feel like they're going to get it this week, and can that be sustainable for this team?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that new bump too, or with the head coach, and I have to say, I was already one of the first things I did this morning was check that line because I was interested to see what it would be, especially after the 49ers played the way they did last night. The Niners are still favored by 5.5 points. Now it is a game in Santa Clara, but I kind of like the Bears' chances already to at least cover that number because I do think. And really just hearing some of these things over his last couple of weeks, even before this move was made on Friday, I do think Thomas Brown has already commanded the respect of this locker room. And so, I'm curious how you guys feel, because I always feel like sometimes the outsider's perspective is sometimes even more valuable than mine on this because you tend to get too close to this sometimes. But, I still feel like there's a decent amount of talent on this team. And I think that you've seen it come through at different times and just not all together in all 3 phases in the same game, at least enough. Probably at least not since the London game when they took care of the Jaguars. But if Thomas Brown can kind of bring that unity like he's talking about that was addressed in this first team meeting today, I would think that they can put together a 4-quarter game regardless of who the opponent is. Heck, these 3 weeks, guys, they've been playing really tough teams. The NFC North, the toughest division, and all 3 of these games has come down to the last play.
No, I'm with you. It is going to take, obviously, them playing as a cohesive unit and getting the job done finally, in the final minutes of the game. But I'm looking at a Niners team that's drawn dead now. They've lost by 25 or more points the last 2 weeks. They've been just gutted by injuries, and the players that they have healthy aren't the impact makers that they need them to be. I would be shocked if this number doesn't just get tighter and tighter as the week goes on. And I have really liked what I've seen from Caleb, especially from within the pocket and when he's the strides he's made under Brown there, the interim head coach now. I do like the Bears on the road to at least cover, if not outright win this game over a Niners team. I actually think that's a really good probably bet here at the end of the week.
Yeah, and Bo, you saw this team at a very interesting time because it was the week when we were in Arizona. It was the week right after the Hail Mary,
Yeah.
and at that point, the Shane Waldron thing was kind of well on its way to sinking. So that kind of explains why the offense threw up a dud that week. But what we've learned, especially I think even since Friday, and I suspected it at the time, but Matt Eberflus was really lost the defense too after that game, and not only what happened right before the Hail Mary, but also in how it was handled, both in house and publicly with the media afterwards, and just the overall lack of accountability. So that was really right there what happened against Arizona and New England those following 2 weeks before the move was made to hire Thomas Brown. We've seen at least that bump already start to happen on the offensive side of the ball. And then when you really take into account how much I think the defense had let go of the rope too, after losing the respect for Matt Eberflus in the way that it went down in those few weeks, I do think that there's a decent chance here that they get that back this week too. And it's not just about this week, guys, because I think these next 5 games, schedule doesn't really lighten up too much, but we've seen them play competitive games, and even if they can, pull out, I don't know, 3 out of these 5 or something like that, it would be a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it's the biggest concerning thing here was how long it took, right? I mean, it was kind of surprising. Obviously, that they went into hiding at the end of last season and emerged that Eberflus was coming back, and now you're starting to see the benefits of addition by subtraction. They get rid of Nate Davis, they get rid of Shane Waldron, get rid of Eberflus. We'll see if that continues to give them a bump. But it's like they had to be banged over the head over and over and over again just to make these moves that could have been, they could have started the ball rolling, as early as last offseason. And it could have helped avoid some catastrophic missteps here. But, it's going to cost them being competitive this season. And hopefully hit the ground running. I know I saw the quote from on CHGO Bears that Kevin Warren expects this to be, the most popular job, or I'm paraphrasing, head coaching position in all of sports. But, with all that being said, like, I was scared, Hoge, they were going to march Eberflus back up for a third press conference at some point. I mean, it's been so dysfunctional. Did they give any insight, like what the hell went on, like within those 24 hours? And was there any accountability taken from the people still in place and in power positions of why it got to this point?
Yeah, a lot of good points there, Bo. I mean, first and foremost, on what happened Friday, Kevin Warren did take some accountability there and admit that they could have handled that better. He was one of my questions was, like, I know Thursday was Thanksgiving, but how you didn't come into the building Friday morning with a better plan, or sometimes it doesn't matter if it's a holiday. You got to have an emergency meeting. That was the early game of the day on Thursday. So, but I can respect that to a certain extent. They said that they wanted to let people enjoy the rest of their Thanksgiving with their families and really sleep on it before making a decision. But when you hear the context of really what went on in the locker room after the game, it's kind of hard to believe that someone couldn't at least stood up and said, hey, well, maybe let's at least postpone this press conference a little bit later, because that essentially was the explanation, that they just had not come to the final conclusion to fire Matt Eberflus before 9 a.m., which I believe is his earliest media availability he's had all season. So it was a little special circumstances. It's not like he's had a 9 a.m. Zoom call every week after games. So, yeah, at least they admitted they could have handled that better. I think the big thing now, because you're right, Bo, they could have – first of all, they could have made this move in January, right? And they could have aligned the head coach and the quarterback together to begin with. There's nothing they can do about that now, right? And they could have made this move a few weeks ago. I mean, I said at the time, if they had fired Shane Waldron a week earlier, I don't think they lose the game to the Patriots, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if they'd have made a move earlier with Matt Eberflus, at least one or two of these results against the NFC North teams the last 3 weeks would have gone the other way. So maybe they're not completely out of the playoffs. Maybe the season could have still been salvaged. I think the big question now is like, there's not much you can do about that now. How do you make sure that you don't screw this up going forward, right? Because that's where they've lost the faith in the fans right now. And I think that's why these next 5 weeks, they're crucial, because getting back to Thomas Brown, I think he has somewhat of a realistic chance to keep this job. And that's the best case scenario, by the way, guys.
Yeah.
Keep the same system, keep the same relationship with the quarterback. You can almost sort of backdoor your way into still keeping that continuity that you really would have liked to had from the point you drafted Caleb Williams. Now, that shouldn't influence you to kind of reach to that decision. Obviously, if that's not the best guy for the job, but that's why I still do think these last 5 games really do matter.
You know,
Now,
Todd,
Hoge,
go ahead. Go ahead, Todd.
Oh, Hoge, I got a question for you. I think Thomas Brown's going to come in and do a good job, but I'm always worried about interim head coaches. Like, I was trying to think in my brain, when has the last time an interim coach worked out to be the head coach and then been successful?
Yeah.
Is there anybody you can think of? Because I've been trying to rack my brain.
Yeah, no, there's been some examples of guys that haven't turned out to be successful. I will give you a name, though, where he became a head coach later, and it certainly has worked out. But he wasn't interim and then immediately made head coach. But remember, Dan Campbell was the interim head coach in Miami back in the day. And obviously, you know, he didn't keep that job. He ends up going to New Orleans, where I believe he was there for 5 years before they hired him in Detroit. And certainly I'm sure those 5 years with Sean Payton helped him become the coach he is. So, but yeah, you're absolutely right. There's not a ton of great examples.
Bruce Arians, maybe. I mean, he came in interim for the Colts, but that wasn't a disaster situation. I mean, they make the run of the playoffs, and then he takes over in Arizona. The next year, he's a successful head coach.
See, and a lot of people here in Chicago are pointing out how it's not really working with Antonio Pierce right now in Vegas. And here's the thing, though, it's a completely different situation for me, because, you know, Thomas Brown, for one, he's an offensive guy, so he's going to be aligned with the quarterback. He also was already the associate head coach for Sean McVay with the Rams when they won a Super Bowl. That's got to count for something, and he's gotten plenty of head coach looks in the past. Antonio Brown was only a linebackers coach before he was named the interim head coach last year. Unless I missed something, I don't think he ever interviewed for another head coaching job in the league. So the bottom line is, no matter how you end up making these conclusions to get to the guy, you just got to hire the right guy. Like, you got to – sometimes these teams get too caught up in, oh, man, this guy – like Ben Johnson right now, guys. I like Ben Johnson as an offensive coordinator. He's probably the best there is in the league right now. I don't know if he can be a head coach. I don't know if he can command a whole locker room. These are still questions that need to be answered. So just however you get there, whoever the guy is, offensive, defense, it's got to be the right guy. And I think Dan Campbell right now is the perfect example of how that worked out.
Yeah, being a leader of men, but also being a player's coach. It's a fine line, and a lot of the times, like you saw it with the Raiders last year, where the players just pounded the table. They wanted Pierce to stay, but it's not necessarily the best thing overall for the organization. But it would be, for me, from an outsider's perspective, when I see guys like Cliff Kingsbury tied to this job, it's like you're going to pivot off Thomas Brown and all the good work he's done to Cliff Kingsbury, who I think is proven that he's not a leader of men. He's a good offensive play caller. Like, you would just be pivoting to him just because his offense under Jaden Daniels is rolling along. And it's like the debate you had with Ben Johnson's like, you know what he is as far as a play caller, but can he be that guy? Can Cliff Kingsbury learn from his mistakes in AZ? I'd be skeptical that he's learned that much to make the changes necessary to be a head guy.
Well, that would be a wild hire just from the optics of that would be person number 3 that interviewed for the OC job back in January. So you've already elevated Thomas Brown to your interim head coach when he didn't get that job despite interviewing for the OC job back in January. Now you're going to move off of Thomas Brown and hire Cliff Kingsbury, candidate number 3, to eventually be a head coach. That would be an extremely tough sell, in my opinion.
We all silly like the mayor.